Oh boy. Hello, this is Chiak. And we're finally back. We're finally back with part 2 of episode 11, volume 2 of Death Stranding, based on production by Hideo Kojima, novelized by Hitori Nojima, translated by Carley Radford. Why do I feel like I want to yawn despite not wanting to yawn? Anyway, finally, came to. I'm hoping. Oh, wait. Okay, you know what? I was thinking of doing part 2 of episode 11 here and then the next chapter, but I kind of want to leave next week to episode 12. Yeah. Am I reading this right? This is episode 14. Wait, what in the world is going on? You know what? I'll figure out. Oh, there are more. Okay, this might be more than just episode. What? This might be more than just episode. Wait, now is it? Okay, so obviously I got some things crossed here. Okay, well then. I'm clearly confused. Okay, so I'm on episode 12. I'm on episode 12. I will continue with episode 13 and end for episode 14. And next week, assuming nothing happens, I'll continue to the very end. Either way, episode 12, part 2, Capital Knot City, Bridges HQ. Sorry, I'm so thrown off that. Okay, because I do remember reading all this part. Sorry, excuse me as I mean, hey, if I find out something's wrong, I can just easily delete this. Then re-record. Yeah, I do remember all this stuff. So I say. Either way, episode 12, part 2. Capital Knot City, Bridges HQ. John. He looked over his shoulder, but there was no one to be seen. Even though he knew he was hearing things, he still couldn't help but search for the voice's owner. The voice was only echoing in his own head, so the source had to be inside of him. Yet still he scanned the room around him in fear. What if he wasn't just hearing things? What if that was just what he wanted to believe? Once John had heard the report of Sam being sucked into the battlefield, he knew that his time had come. Clifford Unger had returned. He had returned to this world to exact his revenge. He hoped, prayed, that it was all just an illusion, but that was nothing more than wishful thinking. John. It was probably just paranoia right now, but John knew that time would come one day when Cliff would be whispering his name in his ear for real. That was why he had to go straight to the source and put an end to all of this right now. He had to confront the source of his fear. Die Hardman would go back to being just John and, finally, die. It had always been on his mind. And now the time was here. Cliff was using Amelia to invite him to the beach. What happened on that day had always remained vivid in Die Hardman's mind. He remembered it like it was yesterday. He was nervous as hell, but underneath that was a strange kind of euphoria. Not unlike the high he felt when he first went into combat years before, a nameless grunt stumbling around, surrounded by vets who'd seen it all before. Not that he'd stayed nameless for long. He turned out to be a born survivor. And before he knew it, he earned himself a reputation in an audience with President Bridget Strand several months after her inauguration. She'd looked him straight in the eye and told him that she looked him straight in the eye and told him that from that day one, he answered to her. That they were going to rebuild America together. It may have sounded daunting and intimidating, but he knew even then that wasn't her intent. She spoke like someone who'd lived a dozen lifetimes, who'd made the most of each and every one. After she said her piece, she smiled and took a step closer to him. Her necklace, a simple Y-shaped thing, caught the light, and for an instant he saw something impossible. The necklace was glowing, radiant, spreading across her body, chest to abdomen, like something was being drawn out of her ha. He thought at that time, though he couldn't say why. Every time he saw her with that necklace, he remembered the light. "This child's special," Bridget proclaimed. A life support unit shaped like a pod was filled with artificial amniotic fluid, and the baby that had been safely removed from the womb of its brain-dead mother was curled up asleep inside. Bridget stared at the fetus from the other side of the glass. This child was indeed a special child. If a mother suffered brain death at 28 weeks, the fetus didn't usually survive. The president loved that child deeply. She used to fret about his health and care for him like he was her own. She was both Gaia and Medea. That's why no matter how much love she had, she could still be so cruel. John felt like he was going to get swallowed up by Bridget's big eyes as she stared at the baby and looked away. The baby's biological mother was being kept alive by life support equipment and was laid on the bed beside the pod, still connected to the baby by an artificial umbilical cord, but he was already falling into the delusion. That Bridget was the baby's real mother. "This child will be the bridge that connects us all," Bridget told him. This baby, the prototype baby who would not only help rebuild America, might even save humanity one day, reacted to her voice and let out a tiny cry. Bridget caressed the pod and whispered, "It's okay. You're a special child." He was already special to John. But John had only realized that a long time after the child had been removed from his mother's womb and the BB experiments had begun. "You'll be out of there in no time," John heard a voice as he walked down the hallway. "And the second all this is over, I'm going to take you wherever you want to go." Before John even had time to try to remember who the voice belonged to, his attention was snatched away by the open doors to the laboratory, which was dressed up to look like a hospital room from the outside. Someone had been sloppy. You had to pass through multiple layers of security to access this floor. Only a few people would have been able to enter the room, but if anything had happened to the BB, John would never be able to face Bridget again. John held his breath and snuck over to the open doorway to check it out. He could see someone's back as they leaned over the pod. Even though his body was obscured by a shirt, John could tell the man was made of muscle. "Look, BB, brought you an astronaut." Without warning, without a sound, the man leaning over the pod turned around. Astonished by such a clearly drilled action, John couldn't take his eyes off the man's face. The man had the same reaction. "Can I help you?" the man asked. The man's smile instantly jogged John's memory. Whenever John had escaped the jaws of death, that smile was always there to greet him. "Holy shit, John, is that you?" "Captain?" John exclaimed in surprise. "What are you doing here?" The two men embraced each other. Die Hardman, the man who made it back from any situation, and Cliff, The man who always made it back from the verge of death had met once again. My wife's checked in, Cliff explained, indicating toward the hospital bed by the wall. A woman appeared to be sleeping there, surrounded by life support equipment. She herself was brain dead and was dreaming of her unborn baby. John had no idea that she was Cliff's wife. He had no idea that the baby was Cliff's son. How much did the captain know? They don't want a repeat of last year. Cliff looked away from his wife and back toward John. Last year? The void out in Manhattan? John asked, careful to feign surprise. Cliff's wife and baby certainly seemed to fit the bill for the mother and child from Manhattan. This time they had managed to create a special bridge. This time they managed to create a special child, a bridge baby, without causing another incident. But to think that this was Cliff's kid. Now the baby had a special meaning for John, too. But the question of who the baby really belonged to began to spin around John's head. Did it belong to Cliff? Or did it belong to Bridget and America? It was Bridget and the American government who had saved the child from its mother's womb. He was expected to become the savior of America. He was supposed to become a child that belonged to all mankind, to be sacrificed, just like Jesus, who died on the cross atop the hill of Golgotha. Who had been Jesus' real father? This isn't what we agreed on. You said you'd do everything in your power to save BB. Cliff hounded Bridget. It had been a few visits since Cliff and John had first reunited. We are. But we cannot release your son just yet, Bridget answered coolly. There was no hesitation in her cold voice. Believe me when I tell you, it's for the best. Says some woman in a mask who's done nothing but lie to me, Cliff snapped back. What Cliff was saying was right, but John couldn't take his side right now. It made him feel so frustrated and pathetic that he couldn't help his friend. One discovery John had made in the time since he first saw Cliff again was that Cliff knew nothing about the bridge babies. All Cliff had been told was that his wife was brain dead, and the premature fetus had been rescued and moved to the NICU. His wife's corpse would have to be suitably disposed of due to similarities with the Manhattan case. But with the passage of time, they might be able to save the baby. To Cliff, the baby wasn't a bridge baby at all, but his actual child. I have a duty to protect our country. Lies are an unfortunate necessity. Bridget left the room, ignoring Cliff, who was about to say something back. All John was able to do was scurry silently after her. He couldn't bear Cliff's stare. The president gave me the highest level access privileges. I've used them to manipulate the security system. John looked up from the terminal and explained to Cliff a few days after the president brushed him off. We have 5 minutes before it resets, sir. 5 minutes to talk. Off the record. After that day when John walked in on Cliff, Bridget had made the complaint about the defective autolock feature on the door. As a result, John's authorization had been upgraded to the highest level. They're moving your son to a new facility tomorrow. You'll never see him again. He'll serve as the foundation of a new communications network, a sacrifice for a nation that no longer exists, John hurriedly explained. Cliff's face clouded over. It wasn't surprising. This was the first he heard about it. This child's special. Your baby is going to become a bridge baby for all of America. John began to divulge all he knew about the BB experiments. It was a few months after the initial Death Stranding explosions. Some private hospital was doing a C-section. It was an unusual case. At 7 months along, the kid's mother had become brain dead. but they put her on life support for the baby's sake. But her blood pressure began to drop, and the kid showed signs of bradycardia. I don't know how to say that. So they had to perform an emergency cesarean. The procedure went well, and the plan was for the baby to be cared for in the NICU for a while. It was during the final stages of the operation when the void out hit. The records show one of the doctors screaming, "I can see them." At that time, medical procedures were broadcasted on closed networks for medical interns. When the footage was analyzed, we realized the doctor shouted that at the exact moment he touched the umbilical cord to separate mother and child. That's when the void out hit and the hospital became a crater. We didn't understand what it meant at the beginning, but as we researched the Death Stranding, we began to believe that the doctor was referring to, was the BTs. We began to think that maybe if we could find another mother and child and use the umbilical cord that connected them to try to recreate the same conditions, we might be able to sense BTs, and that might help us to finally understand the whole Death Stranding phenomenon. The president at the time went ahead with the project, and experiments and testing commenced. It started back when we were still in the army. It was kept top secret. Anyone who wasn't directly involved didn't even know the project existed. At first, the experiments were performed in a government facility in Manhattan, but the documents and records from that time were so strictly controlled that even I'm not sure what really happened. What I do know is that the experiments ended in failure. In fact, the entirety of Manhattan Island was wiped clean off the map. It was a complete catastrophe. The president who oversaw the experiments was swept up in it all and killed, too. Then came Vice President Bridget Strand. She was next in line for the job, so she assumed the presidency. She ordered all the experiments to be cancelled and the data to be destroyed. She was a strong leader and wanted to prioritize the quelling of all the chaos and social unrest left behind in the wake of the disaster. The official explanation was that something unexpected had made a brain-dead patient necrotized. The BB experiments remained a secret. That was why you ended up bringing your partner here. John took a deep breath. His throat was awfully dry, but Cliff's expression compelled him to keep speaking. But the BB experiments weren't abandoned. Even though Bridget ordered them to be cancelled, she took command. They continued, with even fewer people involved than before. Your baby was the subject of their experiments. At first, the president believed that we would be able to visualize BTs by using BBs, since one of the most dangerous aspects of the BTs is that they're invisible. Not being able to see them only made people more anxious and afraid. If we could see them, then the idea was that we could eliminate some of that fear and come up with some countermeasures against them. It was during the course of that research that we realized that they could be used for another purpose. Not only could they be used to sense BTs, but we could also use them as a medium for a brand new communication system that uses the beach. It means the BBs are no longer regarded as people, but as parts, as equipment. BBs are to become human sacrifices on the altar of American Reconstructionism, John said, taking a scrap of paper from his pocket and passing it to Cliff. He was about to go over his 5-minute limit. Burn it when you're done. The rest is up to you, sir. Cliff accepted it silently, but John wondered whether he would actually read it as he left the room. A few days passed. John heard the door open and close behind him, but he didn't turn back. It was time. He had done his part with security. The rest was up to Cliff now. You swore an oath to the present. Why are you helping me? Cliff asked, drawing up beside him without making a single sound. Because you saved my life, sir. Again and again, John replied. Neither man could look the other in the face. Both simply stared down at the BB's mother as she slept on life support. No matter what hellhole I got sent to, I always made it back. I was so successful that I was selected to serve by the president's side. Back then, I thought I was invincible. I thought I was some kind of action hero, but I'm not the hero. You are, sir. When you were no longer around, I had to face up to the fact that I wasn't the man I thought I was. I can't live without something to dedicate myself to. At one time, that used to be you. Now it's America. You're the reason I'm still alive, and it's past time I paid that debt. Please let me help you this time. John had to Cliff the gun he had concealed. Cliff's eyebrows twitched slightly. It was the gun he had once given to John. I can't terminate your wife's life support from inside her room. The system won't allow it. So this is the only other option. There's no reason to keep her trapped in this brain-dead state forever. She can't just keep dreaming of her baby forever. An alarm is set to go off if she flatlines. I've rigged the system to mimic her vitals, but you won't have long. 5 minutes, tops. Don't hesitate, sir. This is the only chance he'll get. John watched Cliff check the revolver cylinder and silently left the room. The first thing John saw was blood all over the floor. Things hadn't gone as planned. As John's eyes followed the red trail back, he spotted Cliff at the end of it. Without a moment's hesitation, John sprang into action and ran to Cliff. He was slouched against the wall, his arms slick with blood. The pod containing the BB was covered in blood, too. Oh, God. I'm sorry, Captain, John cried. He crouched down beside Cliff, who looked up and smiled weakly. John could hear footsteps rushing down the hallway behind them and turned to find himself confronted with some heavily armed men. They were special forces. The security alarm had gone off. Hold your fire. John stood up reflexively and opened his arms wide to stop them. All the guns were now pointed at his chest. Thanks for trying, John. John heard Cliff's voice behind him and felt the cold barrel of a gun dig into the back of his neck. He smelled the scent of blood. Cliff flung his other arm around him. That's right, Captain. Use me as a shield. With his arms still open, John began to back away with Cliff. Then Cliff's grip loosened. John felt an almighty push from his back and staggered and stumbled in front of the Special Forces operatives. As the Special Forces operatives shouted among themselves, John took command of the room with an order that drowned out all of the commotion. Stop! It's a dead end. He's trapped. Security will take it from here. John may have been able to exert control over the Special Forces, but the situation still hadn't changed for the better. In fact, it was getting worse and worse. Cliff was going back on himself, and now the only place left for Cliff to run to was back to the laboratory. But by the time John reached the lab, there were already people outside. The other members of the security team were there, engine cutters in hand, trying to remove the doors. John didn't remember giving that order. This room is off limits. No one goes in, John shouted, receiving looks of disapproval from the security team. But he's in there, sir. I saw him, one teammate objected. You saw wrong. Now check the other way. Go, John barked back. The men looked at each other. It was clear they were having trouble accepting an order that didn't make any sense, but John had to get them away from here. As he reached for his holster to pull out his gun, he heard a voice. No, open it up. He's in there. It was Bridget. She was here with the Special Forces. There was nothing else that John could do. The doors were prized open, and Special Forces advanced on his old captain. John heard a gun go off, and the Special Forces swarm around him. Cliff was covered in blood and saying something to the pod. Once all of Cliff's strength had left his body, the pod rolled to the floor. Special Forces picked it up without a moment's delay and handed it to Bridget. Bridget gasped. John was lost for words, too. Cliff smiled sadly at the pair of them from the floor. He was holding the naked baby to his chest and smiling. Captain, John muttered, dumbfounded. The amniotic fluid was dripping from the pod onto the floor. There it mixed with Cliff's blood to form a vortex pattern. Had Cliff already given up? Was he trying to die together with his baby? John refused to believe that. Cliff had saved him time and time again. Cliff would be able to save his son. Save him. Please save him. Shoot him, John. The pain gripped John like someone was squeezing his heart tightly. Why? Why his child? Why do I have to shoot the father of this child? Shoot him, Bridget commanded again. His trembling arms felt like they were acting on their own. Cliff looked up at John. John couldn't believe that the pale face reflected back in Cliff's eyes was his own. His hand that gripped the gun and his fingers on the trigger felt like they belonged to somebody else. I gave you an order. Shoot him. For America. 2 gunshots sounded. America had killed Cliff. Okay. End of episode 12. Moving on to episode 13. It's a rather short chapter, I must say. Episode 13, Bridges. Sam had left Port Knot City and continued to head east. His destination was Capital Knot City. He was still making his way back to HQ, back to Deadman, Hartman, Lochna, and the comatose Fragile. His movements were heavy, like each part of him had been placed in restraints. Even though he wasn't carrying any cargo, his back hurt and his hips groaned. Every single calorie he had ingested had been converted into energy for walking, and there was nothing else left. He had visibly lost weight, and it felt like his body was shrinking in on itself. He lost count of the number of times he had nightmares about his body wearing away to nothing as he continued to walk. The one redeeming feature of his lonely march back was that the number of safe houses he could take a rest at along the way had increased. As communications had become operational in this area, the amount and frequency of the cargo delivered by Bridges had grown. The safe houses had been constructed along this route to offer support for these deliveries. Chiral printers were also functioning reliably. Chiral printers were also functioning reliably. Reliably? Why can I say that word? Reliably. It just sounds weird. Chiral printers were also functioning reliably. So the East was reaping the benefits of being brought back online first. The only problem now was that communications were malfunctioning and no new bases could be established. It was like they had gone back to how things were before they had activated the network at all. Unable to stomach the irony, Sam continued to drag his aching body toward its destination. When he finally found the safe house for the first time in days, it was almost destroyed. While there were still stockpiles of food and medicine in the private basement room, the electricity supply was unstable and the communication terminal would not activate. He couldn't even use the incubator with communications in such a bad state. Sam was worried that he hadn't allowed Lou to rest enough on their way here. Lou was showing obvious changes. While Lou had been connected to Sam, the BB no longer dozed off as much anymore. Lou had become more curious about the outside world and was conveying much clearer emotions to Sam. It meant Lou was being pulled closer and closer to the world of the living. Lou should have been presenting with symptoms of autotoxemia by now, after spending so long away from the still mother's womb, but there were no signs of it as yet. It was different from the last time Deadman had treated Lou. Sam worried about what this meant for Lou's future. Sam held the disconnected pod to his chest and lay down. As he watched the dozing Lou, he fell into a deep sleep himself. This child's special. Was this why he had to go through this? There were faces Faces and faces, countless faces were staring at him. They edged closer until they filled his entire view before disappearing. Faces he had seen before, faces he might see in the future, faces he would never encounter, and faces that died long ago. He would never encounter faces. What? They all disappeared. Okay, I'm going to take it back. Faces he had seen before, faces he might see in the future, faces he would never encounter, and faces that died long ago. They all appeared before him and vanished. Pinned down like an insect under a microscope, he was unable to move. All he could do was let them examine him. Which are you? A face he didn't know swam into view. Am I connecting to you? Or are you connecting to me? Where are you? Are you in the past? Are you still alive? Are you in the land of the living or the land of the dead? Somewhere in the distance, a whale was singing, the sound of a mating call. But is it? Couldn't it be crying out in sadness? One of the many staring faces, a woman, split from ear to ear, becoming one giant mouth. Small canine teeth crowded the mouth right at the back of its throat. It made a disturbing sight. It made a disturbing tearing sound as it gnawed through the invisible wall that protected him. The stench of rotting organs surrounded him. He watched a star explode, followed by a vision of a world full of microscopic life that was first born to these lands. He slid down its throat, mingled with its gastric juices before being pushed through its contracting and relaxing intestines. Finally, he was expelled from its anus. A wave washed over the naked body, the ha, that was soiled with blood and excrement. As he was hit by the wave, he felt the world spin around him, and he no longer knew where he was. He tried to stand, but fell back. He had neither hands nor feet. He was just a lump of flesh with eyes, a mouth, ears, and a nose carved out of it. The breaking waves were toying with him as they knocked him around the shoreline. An infinite number of sea creatures were stranded all around him. A baby cried, but without his soul, Sam couldn't stand. All he could do was shuffle across the sand with his mouth as he looked for the child. A gigantic wave carried Sam away, far from the shoreline. A sun more enormous than Sam had ever seen before what? A gigantic wave carried Sam away, far from the shoreline. A sun more enormous than Sam had ever seen before appeared and broke the sky into two, mercilessly beating down on his back. All the water disappeared in an instant, and Sam's skin began to wrinkle and dry out. Now he could only hear the waves. They no longer reached him. He could smell the scent of sea salt, but he couldn't get back to it. He dug his chin into the sand, and as pain engulfed his entire body, he struggled his way toward the baby's cries. His dried and hardened skin began to form spikes. Sam used them to try desperately to propel himself forward in the sand. His skin cracked and blood oozed out, and the bloodied protuberances began to transform into long, thick limbs. Sam used his forelimbs to keep on advancing. As he cursed his imperfect ha, he kept on moving forward. Soon the sun began to sink toward the horizon, and a frighteningly cold night set in. Both he and the sea froze over, and all sound disappeared. The sky was clear, and countless stars glowed without a twinkle. This place was directly linked to the rest of the cosmos. It felt like if he looked up, he'd fall, so Sam closed his eyes tight. When he tried to draw his own body in tight to endure the cold, his arms and legs grew. Sam could finally stand. Guided by the baby's cries, he began to walk. As he walked, his body grew. His thighs became more muscular, his hips became higher, and his spine stretched. Now he could look out far in front of him. Now he could move his arms at will and could grab objects with the palms of his hands. Now he would be able to embrace the child. As he grew more confident, the baby's cries seemed to grow louder. When he called out Lou's name, a new f- he found a newborn, Lou, crying at his feet. Sam kneeled and picked Lou up with both hands. He held Lou to his chest. They were finally together. Lou's small hands grabbed the dream catcher around Sam's neck. Lou. Sam called out Lou's name over and over. Lou, I won't leave you anymore. This child's special. Sam's chest suddenly became light. The wind pierced it as though a hole had opened up within him. He wasn't holding anything anymore. There was nothing in his arms. When he looked up, he was once again surrounded by countless faces. Where are you? He was asked. Where are you? He was asked as he began to feel his own body slip away. Sam awoke to the sound of a steady tapping. It was a quiet sound right next to his ear. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. He was curled around Lou's pod asleep. Lou was fervently tapping on the window of the pod from the inside. Lou had brought him out of his nightmare. Sam's whole body felt stiff, but the ache gave him comfort in the knowledge that everything was real again. Sam wiped the tears from his face, turned toward the pod and stared at Lou. Had Lou been having the same dream? Sam felt anxious. He didn't want this child to be sullied with such a nightmare. He thought about the voice he heard in his sleep. This child's special. That's right, you are, Sam whispered to himself. But there were no children who weren't special. Each and every child mattered, had a right to exist. Sam's eyes met Lou. Lou was making a strange expression. Sam realized just how angry the situation made him feel. Once Sam left the safe house, it was only a matter of time before he began to hurt again. He had begun to feel so numb that it was like he was walking in another person's body. He felt like he was putting someone else's foot on the ground with each subsequent step and was breathing through an invisible veil. He felt ungrounded, like he was still dozing in the tail end of a dream. He slapped his cheeks a few times to try to wake himself up. Although Deadman had denied it, what if Sam had been dreaming this whole time? He couldn't shake the idea from his mind. Maybe he was still inside his mother's womb, just tormented by the laws of this nonsensical dream. Not that there was any guarantee the outside world was any more sensible. Was he dreaming? Was this real? The world all this was taking place in was so convoluted. Numerous threads were entangled with one another and wove a complex and mysterious pattern. To escape from his dreams and to confront reality, Sam would have to head for their source. Between the ridge lines to the north, Sam could see the faint shadow of a tower. It belonged to the incinerator where he had burned Bridget's body. Sam wondered what would have happened if he had just left her body in its hospital bed instead. Would her Ha, with its umbilical cord that connected her to the beach, have necrotized and turned her into a BT? Would she still have felt a strong attachment to America and tried to come back? Would she have betrayed her wish to see this world connected back up and cause a great extinction in its place? Questions kept running through Sam's head. The incinerator was the first place where Sam connected with Lou. It was the place where he had sent Bridget off to the next world and begun his mission to save Lou. It seemed both so long ago and like something that had happened only yesterday. When Sam finally approached Capital Knot City, all he could see was decay, like an old monument that had been slowly chipped away with the passages of the ages. With the passage of the ages. Perhaps it was all in Sam's head. Maybe it had always been like this. Large cracks ran through the outer wall that surrounded the periphery of the city, and the bridge's logo on it was dirty and faded. The air was heavy with the smell of rusted iron. to the point where Sam hesitated to breathe in. It looked like the capital city of an Amer. It looked nothing like the capital city of an American on the brink of being rebuilt. Of an American? Oh my goodness. It looked nothing like the capital city of an America on the brink of being rebuilt. It was the city of death. Nobody came to welcome Sam, so he took the elevator to the basement alone. It was the same route he had used when he brought Bridget her morphine. Even when the cage reached the elevator hall, Sam couldn't sense anyone around. Most of the lights were out. Sam proceeded through the gloomy hallways and opened the door to the president's old room. Sam! Lucknow burst forth. Sam instinctively moved out of her way. Sam grimaced at himself as he recoiled from his friend who had been waiting for him all this time. He could change the way the entire world worked, but he still couldn't change himself. Perhaps he just didn't want to. You're back. It must have been one hell of a journey, especially on your own. Deadman approached Sam, trying to gloss over the awkward atmosphere. Oh wait, sorry, wrong voice. You're back. It must have been one hell of a journey, especially on your own. Deadman approached Sam, trying to gloss over the awkward atmosphere. But now the whole team is together again, he continued, even though the only other person Sam saw was Hartman in cardiac arrest on the sofa. Deadman read Sam's puzzled expression and showed him to a bed against the wall. Lying there on the hospital bed was Fragile. She was hooked up to a respirator and a drip. Her vitals were being monitored by the surrounding equipment. Despite their earlier conversation, it still seemed like she had a way to go to recover. The sight of Fragile lying there like that reminded Sam of Bridget on her deathbed. He shook his head to try and get rid of the mental image. That's our fault. Too much traveling to from the beaches in such a short span. It's not just from transporting us. She'd been looking for Amelia too, Deadman explained. Chiral matter contaminated her cells, effectively causing jet lag on a molecular level. Because of that, her homeostatic mechanisms were shaken. Don't worry, she's not in any danger, but she needs some rest. Sam didn't understand all of Deadman's explanation, but he was relieved to see a bit of color in her face while she slept. When Sam heard the phrase jet lag on a molecular level, he had imagined an even more serious version of what she looked like from the neck down. The director, Die Hardman is back too. He's been looked after in another room. Bridges personnel found him lying outside the isolation ward, similar to when you came back from Cliff's Beach, Deadman added. And it seemed the whole team was back together. The AED kicked in and brought Hartman back to life. At first he looked surprised to see Sam there, but his serious expression soon returned as he looked over to Fragile. He nodded as Deadman informed him that he had told Sam everything, and this time turned to Sam. This world is in a similar state to Fragile. Nothing is integrated anymore. The cells that make up her body are all running in different time axes and egos. In Fragile's case, the solution is very simple. A single person is made up of a myriad of different components, all intersecting and working together. But what connects all these components is a person's will. It's this will that will correct any misalignment for her. Now, in the context of this world, humans, and by extension our beaches, play the same role as the cells in Fragile's body, and in much the same way we also require a higher plane, an equivalent to her will, to retune everything so that we're all running on the same time axis again. Sam thought he suddenly saw Fragile move from the corner of his eyes, but she was still sleeping she was still sleeping with the exact same expression as before. He had been tricked by a floating creature near her head. It was a cryptobiote. Traditionally, all of our beaches have existed independently. We have connected to each other not through the idea of the beach, but through talk of family and tribes, concepts of this world, the universe, and this planet. These concepts and connections formed the driving force behind the survival of Homo sapiens. But now we have this new concept called the beach, which we have connected to our reality via the chiral network, with the added component of the existence of an extinction entity. Amelia's beach exists on a higher plane that can control other beaches. If each of our beaches is a single capillary, Amelia's beach is the heart that pumps blood to the rest of us. Capillaries are subordinate to the greater whole, a whole governed by the heart, which gives direction, which dictates flow. You may be the only one able to travel against the flow and reach her. Sam seized the cryptobio as it floated by. When Fragile had first recommended one in that cave, he had been skeptical and turned it down, but he had found himself munching on one a few times now. But, having done so, if she does not wish to let you go, if she wishes to keep you, she can, Hartman finished. Fragile and Di Hartman broke free from her beach, did they? Sam refuted, releasing the cryptobiote. I don't think it was any different from what happened to you. I didn't get out because I wanted to. Oh, whoops, wrong voice. I don't think it was any different from what happened to you. I didn't get out because I wanted to. It was Fragile's voice. She was sitting up in bed, chewing on the cryptobiote. I was forced out. Repatriated, if you will, by her. Dead Man looked like he couldn't believe his eyes and immediately checked on her vital monitors. Hartman was looking at her fondly with a look of paternal concern. Welcome back, Sam. Guess you need me after all. Fragile grimaced as she tried to get out of bed. Lochna immediately lent Fragile her shoulder. Thank you, Fragile whispered as she tried to grab another cryptobiote that was floating around the room. Sam plucked it out of the air and laughed. You want it? He asked. There's no time to waste, right? Fragile said, chewing on the cryptobiote and looking Sam straight in the eye. Look, Sam. She wants you to go to her. That's her final wish. Don't you think? Fragile commented. The words final wish rang in Sam's ear. How could Fragile be so sure? So that's it, huh? Amelia's the EE, and this is her endgame. That was the only way Sam could bring himself to ask. Fragile hung her head, but Sam couldn't tell if that was an answer or not. Just so we're clear, if I want to stop the last stranding and come back in one piece, I need to go to her beach and talk her out of it. That about right? Correct. As cliche as it sounds, you're our only hope. Excuse me, correct. Correct. As cliched as it sounds, you're our only hope. Hartman spoke up. Though, quite frankly, I doubt even you can change her mind. The room fell silent. Dead Man was the one to break it. If you can't make her see reason, you'll have to kill her. And if you kill her, you'll save the world, but you'll be stranded outside of it forever. Lochner finished Dead Man's sentence, looking down at her feet and biting her lip. Another bout of silence. This time, nobody seemed to want to break it. Sam gripped his dream catcher and raised his head. Might as well make it official then. You ready to deliver the package? He asked Fragile. She gave a sad smile and nodded. I'll talk to her. Maybe she'll listen. But with the shape the world's in, it'll only be delaying the inevitable. Still, if it buys us time to try and build something better, a new lease on life, at least for a little bit. Well, I can think of one woman who made the most of a chance like that. Nothing lasts forever, not even the world. But we gotta keep it going as long as we can, right? Patch the holes, change the parts, all that. Sam couldn't stop talking, and when nobody else wanted to stop him either. Dead Man, Hartman, Lochna, and Fragile remained silent, hanging onto every word. Back when we met at the cave, the only thing I cared about was making it to the next sunrise. Sure as hell didn't care about America or the future. I was living a lie, hung up on past regrets. I was broken, but somewhere along the way, I started changing. Started meeting people who made me think that maybe it wasn't all bad. People who put their faith in tomorrow and in me. And I kept the lights on and waited for hope to arrive. So I got the liver for their sake. Even if it means you never come back? Deadman asked, as if he wouldn't be able to bear it. All the others in the room had the same fear. Fucked if I do, fucked if I don't, right? Sam shrugged. There was no choice. As long as the hypothesis they shared stood true, there was no other option. Sam disconnected his pod and passed Lou to Deadman. He couldn't take the kid to the beach. Fragile stood in front of Sam. Next to him, Deadman held Lou's pod in his arms, with a strange look on his face. Hartman and Lochner stood on either side of Sam. He looked at each of their faces in turn, and then adjusted his grip on his dream catcher. Fragile gently placed her hand on it. Sam followed her lead and closed his eyes. Okay, concentrate, she told him. Fragile wrapped her arm around Sam. He could feel her body heat. There was no ephenomophobic reaction. Phobic reaction. There was no phobic reaction. Oh my god. There was no phobic reaction. Sam accepted her. Help me look for Amelia. Reach her for me, Sam. Feel her. Fragile tightened her grip and put her forehead to Sam's. Sam sighed. The pulse of another living being quietly came through. Amelia's warmth, her smell, her voice. Sam focused on all his memories of her. Even if he only ever had contact with her on the beach, it didn't matter, because those were the memories that were special to him. I know you love her. You love her. Normally, those words would have flustered Sam, but now he could accept them. Then you disappeared, never to be seen again. Is that the end of the episode? Oh, yeah. Okay, so that was the end of episode 13. I'm going to have to go back and reorder with the last 6. I just have episode 11, part 1. I must have been really tired when I was reading it, because clearly when I ended things, it was on episode 12. And it just literally, it did not cross my mind. Or maybe I just completely forgot. I imagine I just completely forgot. But that's fine. I'll just have to reorder things. Either way, so with that, there is this much of the book left. I'm hoping, I'm not too tired, because I want to finish it all. Do all of episode 14 and then read the epilogue, which itself is fairly short. So the epilogue's not a problem, but we'll see if I can make my way through it. But either way, that's going to be the end of this cold reading session, and we'll be finally done with Death Stranding Vol.2. And then I could find, I don't know, I kind of want to read The Wizard of Oz, because I have that book. So that is what my plan thing is next after this, but we still got one or two more reading sessions to go, depending of time and me not falling asleep while trying to read. Either way, thank you for liking if you liked. Thank you for commenting if you commented. Thank you for subscribing if you subscribed. And thank you for simply clicking on this video. Until next time, guys. See ya.